Hi BookTube, it's Amy. I'm here with the next chapter of A London Book Window by James Milne, and this week's chapter is titled The Romance of Books. You like books, to read them, to hear about them, to talk about them, perhaps, for who knows all things, even to write about them. Has it occurred to you that every book has one history before it is written, another history after it is written, and possibly a romance or a tragedy thrown in? What I mean is that with books, there always goes a little gamble of surprise. We like in life the thought, you never know what may happen, and it is equally present in the book world and equally likable. Suppose, though, that I illustrate all this by a perfectly true story about Blackmore's fine and familiar story, Lorna Dunn. You might think that with its color, its action, and its calling people, it was safe from all mischances and sure of all the good chances. That was not so, and therefore it is an outstanding token of luck, or the want of luck, in our English bookland. Lorna Dunn was published way back in the years when the 3-volume novel, the three-decker, as Rudyard Kipling calls it in a poem, was the only certain packet for the islands of the blessed. Full 30 foot she towered from waterline to rail. It cost a watch to steer her and a week to shorten sail, but spite all modern notions, I found her first and best, the only certain packet for the islands of the blessed. Lorna Dunn was sent into the world by Mr. Sampson Low, and what then happened to it I heard from his young partner and my old friend, the late Mr. Edward Marston. It made no great hit as a 3-volumer, for one reason, because Blackmore was only on the edge of his success, and so not very well known. But Mr. Sampson Low, a man with the fine balance of literary and business talent, which makes a good publisher, was sure of the quality of the romance, sure also that it would win fame if he could once get it going. What should he do? He decided on a course which was unusual in his day, namely to immediately give Lorna Dunn a second birth, as you might say, in a single-volume form. He put the disappointment of a 3-volumer in his pocket, set the tale of the Dunns afloat as a small craft, and waited to see what would happen. What did happen was something that neither he nor anybody else could have imagined. The engagement of Queen Victoria's daughter, Princess Louise, to the then Marquis of Lorne, the late Duke of Argyll, happened to be announced in the newspapers. The splendid British public somehow associated the royal romance with Lorna Dunn, or Lorna Dunn with the royal romance, it matters not which, and bought the novel like hotcakes. Yes, that quite plainly told was the good fortune which befell Blackmore's masterpiece, as we think of it, though he himself preferred his other story, Springhaven, A Romance of Surrey. One would scarcely say that it would not have come into its own, but for the accidental glow of a royal wedding. One may say, however, that it would not have done so as quickly and as fully, and it might even, sad to think, have missed its ship, as lots of good books have done, and gone down into the literary ocean of oblivion, unheralded and unsung. To speak of Lorna Dunn has been to send one back on the years, not an invitation which eager youth always likes. But it was worthwhile, wasn't it? And anyhow, I am going to atone by telling you, in another way, not less romantic history of a book of our day, Florence Barclay's Rosary, which, as you know, has been a tremendous bestseller both in England and in America. Mrs. Barclay wrote it during the month she was compelled to lie on her back after a strain from overtaxing her strength at cycling. She wrote it in the quiet rectory where she and her husband then lived in Hertfordshire. She had always a turn for setting things down, and always, what is far rarer, the natural gift of storytelling. It pleased her to write this tale as it helped to pass the time, and going on a visit to her sister, Mrs. Bollington Booth in America, she took the manuscript with her. "Oh," she said one morning, "I have a sort of novel which I've done, and I wish you'd look at it. You see," she added in such words to her sister, "you are an experienced author and can advise me and perhaps show me what I have done, and show what I have done to your own publisher, Mr. Putman." So things fell out, for Mrs. Bollington Booth liked the Rosary, and Mr. George Haven Putnam and his advisors liked it, and it went to the printers, then to the binders, and finally came forth a book. When it did, America at once took to the song of the Rosary, and it rang over the American continent as swiftly as a more recent, less beautiful song about bananas and other vegetables. With the vogue of the song, there flew the fame of the story, the two so intermixed that it was difficult to say which was which. Meanwhile, a like pageant of success had begun in England, where the Rosary had been simultaneously published by the Putnams. The English vogue and the American vogue were distinct and different, and yet one held out a hand of assistance, as it were, to the other, because although the Atlantic is wide, a popular work will always bridge it. Quickly, the Rosary became the bestseller of two worlds, and if, as we have seen, it had its luck, it also had the qualities to make that luck good, always a necessary condition of prosperity. The publishers of Lorna Dunn and of the Rosary had good fortune, as they deserved it, but sometimes that fickle jade goes by when she might well be captured. A little story which has been whispered among literary gossips about Mrs. Eleanor Glenn's visits of Elizabeth and the late William Hindman illustrates this kind of happening. Mrs. Glenn was new to authorship when she brought her visits of Elizabeth to the Hindman house, where it got courteous attention. Mr. Hindman was a born publisher, and especially he had that indefinable quality, flair, which also makes a journalist. He managed somehow to know about all the likely manuscripts that came to his number of Bedford Street, nearby the Strand, and he liked the visits of Elizabeth. So without delay, he said he would publish it if Mrs. Glenn would make certain changes which he and his men of letters thought would improve the story. She, however, did not think well of the changes and took her story to Mr. Gerald Duckworth in Henrietta Street. He accepted it straight away. It brought her name and fame, and he has published for her ever since. A quite recent drama of literature has been the burning of a diary left by William Hindman, which would have made a distinctive and interesting book, and which now goes on to the never-never shelf of the English book world. Those of us who knew Mr. Hindman know what a vital personality he was, how wide his contact with authors was, and therefore what intimate conversations and personal vignettes that diary might have contained. No doubt it was the difficulty of printing such confidences that led his relatives, into whose care the journal finally came, to have it burned like Byron's. When he died, Mr. Hindman left it to his old friend and partner, Mr. Sidney Pauling, who was shortly to follow him across the unknown border. Once or twice the latter spoke about it, each time wondering what he was to do with it. He indicated that there were parts of the journal which might very well be given to the public, and on the ground of interest should be given. But there were other parts too confidential for publicity, and the problem was to select and edit, a problem which Mr. Hindman had not faced in his own lifetime. The consequence was that Mr. Pauling did nothing, which, maybe, was what most of us would have done in these circumstances. Here was good reading about Wagner and Whistler, Maeterlinck and Max Nordau, Bernard Shaw and Max Beerbohm, and many other literary and artistic celebrities. But what to give and what not to give, that was the rub. Now a blazing fire has settled it all. Some admirable first-hand memoirs have gone up in smoke, and there is no more to be said. There is another kind of book that never materializes, the book which a writer would, in his heart, like to write, but which, in his mind, he knows he never will write. Our friend Sir William Robertson Nicoll had, all his life, been gathering material for a new, up-to-date history of British journalism. He had done the same for a biographical work on eminent Scotsmen, because to the end, though he had long dwelt in England, he remained a true, pure Scot, devoted to his native country. He was conscious, perhaps, that he could never in his busy life achieve those two monumental books, but he liked to think of them, to work for them, and possibly the materials he collected may be sifted to us by another hand. John Morley was, at one time in his life, deeply taken by the rise of the New Italy under Garibaldi, Mazzini, and Cavour. He made up his mind to write a history of the uniting of a scattered Italy into a great nation, and he waited hopefully for the opportunity to come. It never came, but it gladdened him to see a son of his old friend and colleague, Sir George Trevelyan, another veteran of English letters and politics, become our modern historian of the New Italy. A popular figure of the worlds of journalism, literature, and politics, Mr. T.P. O'Connor, made his first hit by deliberately sitting down and writing a life of Benjamin Disraeli. It was a hard task, a big task, because materials were not easy to get, and Dizzy, who was then alive, was not likely to fling them at an unknown young Irishman. But T.P. was interested in the character and personality of the Jewish leader of English conservatism. He gave endless pains and much time to the elucidation of him, and the result was a book which was widely read and which made T.P.'s writing gifts known. Why, by the way, should we not have a new edition of this biography? For it might well be read beside the fuller official one of Disraeli. We do have available Dean Farrar's Life of Christ, and we think it based on a quite conservative reading of the scripture. You may, however, care to know that when Dr. Farrar wrote it to the order of a well-known publishing house, it was thought over-advanced. He took it to another house, to Cassell's of La Belle Sauvage Yard, and they have been sending it forth in print ever since. Its success was not less than success which the Italian Giovanni Papini's very different study of Christ was to have in our immediate day, and indeed, to many people, Dean Farrar's name will come back most clearly as the author of his striking study of Christ. One might go on talking about the surprises, the chances, the romances, the tragedies which attend the writing and the publishing of books. It is a fascinating subject because it proves that the business of the pen is not dull at any point. Always the penman and the publisher will be asking, like the child, and what happens next? Something always does happen. What it is to be, you must wait and see, but it will be worthwhile waiting. And so that is the romance of books. And next week's chapter is called First Novels and Novelists.